So I thought I'd finally moved on from my brake issues, but it seems that the brake saga isn't over until it's over. Yeah, so a quick catch up for any of you that maybe forgot. Took the car out to Winton Raceway early this year, and towards the end of the day, the front left wheel suddenly locked up while I was driving out on track. Oh, okay, something's very wrong. Thankfully, it wasn't completely catastrophic, had to get towed into the pits, but nonetheless, the front left wheel was completely locked up, and it was because the brake caliper had come free and jammed itself up inside between the wheel and the brake disc, and it was all a bit of a mess in there. Fast forward, I cut the wheel off the rim, or the rim off the hub, however you want to put it, to be able to get the wheel off and to be able to get the caliper out to see the damage. The damage was, well, one, the wheel was done. Two, the bolts that secure the caliper to the bracket that adapts to the hub, they had sort of torn out of the brake caliper bracket, and the brake caliper bracket had a bit of damage and the threads were pretty shit. So the immediate answer, or the immediate fix, was to repair the brake caliper bracket, because that was clearly the bit that was the worst in all of this, and I used helicoils for that. I also checked the front right driver's side, and that too had somewhat loose bolts, so I also helicoiled that bracket. Yes, I didn't just do one. And in theory, that had kind of fixed all of my problems. I needed a new wheel, but that was another issue and not so difficult to sort out. Then I assembled it all back together with this brake caliper, which is the one that was damaged and jammed up against the wheel. A new set of pads, got the car back out at Sandown Raceway just a few weeks later, and in general the car was working great. However, I did notice that the front left brake caliper didn't feel as right. It didn't feel as it was working like it should be. Nonetheless, brought the car into the pits, and on some quick inspection I noticed that definitely the pad wear was not even, and by the time I got back home I persisted with the day and kind of drove around the issue, although I was conscious that it was probably not something you should play with. You know, it's playing with fire, right? Running a car with not necessarily perfect brakes is borderline on silly, but I am a silly person. Brought the car home, and clearly I realized very quickly what the issue was. One of the 4 pistons in this caliper is stuck and no longer functioning. So in the damage, in it being swung around inside the wheel, it's dented across the face of the side of the caliper here, and I guess taken the cylinder bore out of round. So one of these pistons does not move. Not ideal. Clearly it did work at Sandown, but I wanted a replacement. So, put an order in with a place called Brakes Direct in Queensland here in Australia. They had one for sale. They said immediately after I placed my order, it'd be 2 weeks. I'm like, yeah, cool. Fast forward 2 months later, still haven't got my caliper, despite many emails and attempts at phone calls. Could not get them to respond to me. Eventually, finally got them to cancel my order, although that took another week of me asking for the actual money to come back. Finally got my money back. During that time, I reached out to the people that make this brake caliper kit, specifically the caliper mounting bracket, the aluminium piece that mounts to the factory Mazda hub and attaches the caliper to the car. I said to them basically my experience. Hi, I have an MX-5, it's kind of worked up a bit, and the bolts seem to have come loose and potentially torn some of the threads out. Just thought I'd let you know. My solution to the problem was to helicoil them. Let me know what you think. Maybe it's something you could consider for your future customers. Lo and behold, they very quickly got back to me. In fact, they forwarded my email to V-Sport, the people who I actually bought the kit through. So my email initially went to Boz and Jack Engineering, the guys who actually do the machining work. but I bought the kit through V-Sport. So these guys are all based in Sydney, Australia. And so V-Sport called me, and we had a really long call, probably 40 minutes maybe, and spoke about the kit, about my car, the kind of I guess, performance that it has, and my experience with the kit. And interestingly, they brought up that they saw my video of the original install. So I don't know how that happened. I didn't say anything about YouTube videos or anything. And that video where I put this brake kit in originally was from like 2019. So it's something like 4 years ago. I don't know exactly how they found that I had a video on their brake kit on my YouTube channel from so long ago, but they did. And they were sort of apologetic because there were a few things that I criticised in the kit, for example, the lack of instructions. But fundamentally, I mean, the kit is working well, the brake kit is good, a bit expensive, but interestingly, they were quite adamant and confident that the product that they provided was correct and appropriate and didn't need any change, which I find a little bit interesting, a little bit unusual. Obviously, my experience is only my own. I can't speak for how other people with this potential kit have, what experiences they've had. And I don't know many other MX-5 people running this particular kit. Maybe there aren't many because it's not a common thing to buy. So I can only speak for myself and my use case. But they didn't seem, they were very good to talk to, willing to discuss and spend quite a bit of time on the phone, but I felt like they weren't willing to accept that potentially the product needed some adjustment, and that what they were offering and the solutions they had were the right answer. They gave, for example, the Toyota 86 Racing Series we have here in Australia. They gave that as an example of how this kit is perfect and you don't need to change anything because all of those cars run them. So they create a product for the 86 series that uses similar, obviously not the same brake kit, but a similar sort of product, an aluminium caliper bracket, and presumably an AP racing caliper. And the 86 series, they all run them and they're all great. I'm assuming that 86 Racing Series is kind of stock cars, they're kind of production cars, with maybe a few bits and pieces, some tyres and maybe an exhaust and a tune, and they're stripped out car, but fundamentally not 300 horsepower. What's an 86 got? 130 horsepower or something factory? I'm not sure, but they're not fast cars. Yeah, they're punchy, but they're not at the level of a turbocharged, worked engine MX-5 that's a bit more serious. And so I think you can't compare. It's kind of apples to oranges. So in my view, you can't say, oh, we make a product for something else that proves that our product is fine. In my opinion, this is a different scenario, and I'm trying to talk to them about my particular use case. They didn't seem to see it as a fault in their product. Immediately after I had that phone call, I got another phone call from Terry Bosanjak, the guy who I originally emailed, who machines the caliper brackets. And he was also really good to talk to, also spent a long time on the phone, probably nearly an hour. And to be frank, we kind of had the same sort of discussion. He spoke about the product, he spoke about what he does and his experience. And as far as I can tell, he has strong experience in engineering and machining. And as far as I mean, I'm not an expert in that stuff, but the way he spoke seemed to imply that he knows what he's doing. That said, I tried to describe to him my situation and my experience with the product and what happened to my car. And he was adamant that it didn't need changing, that the caliper bracket that he sells, the brackets that he's producing, they're fine to have an aluminium thread with a bolt going in them. Now, despite that, so many of you have commented on the YouTube videos. There's been a couple on this story now. So many of you commented that using aluminium with a steel bolt is wrong and that you can't have them for this type of use case, and many different, I don't know what the truth is, I don't know what the actual answer is, maybe there are many answers. A few people have said you can only put a bolt in a few times before the aluminium starts to sort of, I guess the term is yield. A few people said that it should have been helicored from the factory. A few people said you should use safety wire or lock wire. A few people said Loctite. Not many people agreed that the product, as it was correct, which I find interesting. Now, obviously, I had an issue. Maybe it was my fault, but not really many people said, you're an idiot, you did such and such a wrong. Maybe the internet is defending me, I don't know why, but certainly the majority seemed to suggest that the product that I had, as in the Bosanjak aluminium caliper brackets with steel bolts going straight into the aluminium, the majority seemed to think that that was wrong, which I found interesting when the people who are producing it and selling it are adamant to the contrary, that this product is correct and my situation was unique. So that's kind of where the story ends. Now, obviously, you might be asking, but what about that dodgy caliper that you had in your hands just now? Well, because I spoke to V-Sport while on the phone with them, I obviously mentioned, oh, by the way, I've discovered that the caliper is cooked. And he goes, I'll get you one in the mail tomorrow. And he did. I had a caliper here next day. I did pay for it. He made me pay for it. Now, you might argue he should have covered the cost because the damage is in theory not my fault. To be fair, I've had the kit for 4 years. I'm not sure warranty lasts that long. So I was quite willing, although I didn't want to pay for it, I was quite willing to pay for a replacement bracket. Generally, as soon as you buy aftermarket parts for a car and you take them to a racetrack, warranty is void, right? So I wasn't really expecting them to pay for it. He gave me a discount, albeit it was no cheaper than the price that Brakes Direct offered. The difference though is, of course, V-Sport got it to me next day. Brakes Direct screwed me around for 2 months. So credit to V-Sport there. I think their service and responsiveness is quite good in general anyway, but nonetheless, it was an expensive caliper. I paid about 950 Aussie dollars or something, so they're very expensive. The equivalent, like Wilwood Superlight, is almost less than half that. So an expensive caliper. So that's kind of where this story ends, and thankfully ends. Like, that's it, the story's over. Everything's fixed. It's all back together, and in theory, better than it was. Now, I have still got considerations on what I do with the caliper brackets and the bolts that attach to them. So here's where I'm at with that. Yes, I've done the helicoils. I've also added the Nordlock type washers to the bolts in the hope that that will mitigate them coming loose. And I have bought safety wire, which I'm considering using, but I'm gonna sit on it and monitor the bolts, and in between sessions and in between track events, I'll just check that they're still torqued. One thing I did mention to V-Sport was that you didn't provide any torque specs, so I didn't know what I was supposed to do there, so I had to guess. Now, maybe if you did provide torque specs when you provided the kit, I might know how much to tighten them with. Curiously, talking to Terry Bosenjak, he seemed to imply, I just use my hand and I go until I feel like it's tight, which is fair. Then he goes, but realistically, the torque spec that you're supposed to use is blah. I don't even remember what it was. But why did maybe this issue happen? Because I didn't have that torque rating? Don't know. Anyway, I'm moving on. Since having the helicoils in, the bolts have been sturdy, and when you tighten them, they lock tight. As opposed to when there was the alloy bracket, you would tighten them and it was a squishy feeling tightening them. So all in all, much better, really happy, and I'm back on track again very soon. Already had the car back out at the Bend Motorsport Park in South Australia, which is a good 8 hours odd drive from here, and around a, I don't know how many kilometre circuit. It's a very long circuit, some like 20 corners or something. It's an amazing track, really nice facility, just a bit too far away, but nonetheless, the car drove amazingly there until a little issue happened. So this video is about issues. Here's the next one. So you'll have to excuse the hand holding of the GoPro. I'm kind of working mobile today, but it finally happened. I kind of crunched a gearbox. So a lot of you predicted this would happen, and I knew it was probably on the cards eventually, but I've been running this gearbox for many years, and finally at the Bend towards the end of the day, the gearbox packed it in, and somewhere around third or fourth, I think it might be fourth, things are very crunchy. So much so that the car drives, but it doesn't sound right. So something's gone wrong in there. Bit of a sudden failure whilst on track. So yes, that's an update from me. I've got plenty more videos coming very soon. Some more stuff from some of my previous events, such as the Sandown and the Bend events. And I've got Oz Time Attack coming soon, which I haven't been to yet, so maybe there'll be some video out on that. I'm not sure, depends on exactly where the timelines work out, on which video comes out when. It's all a bit of a mess, but thanks for watching. See you next time.